You promise yourself that you'd be different this time. The last one was a mistake. You see that clearly now. You know the warning signs. You know what to look for. And then you meet someone new, and they feel nothing like the last person. They feel right. They feel safe. They feel like home. 6 months later, you are in the same situation. Different face, same pattern. Different name, same damage. And you ask yourself the question that keeps millions of people awake at night. Why do I keep attracting the wrong people? The answer is not what you think. It is not about bad luck. It is not about being too nice or too trusting or too available. The reason you keep ending up with the wrong person is buried so deep in your psychology that you cannot see it operating. But it is there. It has been running since before you could form a sentence. There are 4 mechanisms behind this pattern. Each one is invisible, each one is powerful, and until you understand all 4, the cycle will not break. In the late 1950s, a British psychiatrist named John Bowlby began developing what would become one of the most important theories in psychology. He called it attachment theory, and its central idea was deceptively simple. The way your primary caregiver responded to your needs in the first years of life created a blueprint for every relationship you would ever have. Bowlby's work was extended in the 1970s by developmental psychologist Mary Ainsworth, whose now famous strange situation experiment observed how infants responded when their mothers briefly left the room. Ainsworth identified 3 primary attachment styles. Secure children, whose caregivers were consistently responsive, protested the separation but were quickly comforted upon reunion. Anxious children, whose caregivers were inconsistent, sometimes present, sometimes absent, became intensely distressed and difficult to soothe. And avoidant children, whose caregivers were emotionally unavailable, showed little visible distress but had elevated stress hormones. They had learned to suppress their needs because expressing them did not work. Here is where it gets dangerous. A 2010 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that adults with anxious attachment styles are disproportionately attracted to partners with avoidant attachment styles, and vice versa. The anxious person is drawn to the avoidant person's emotional distance because it mirrors the inconsistency they experienced in childhood. The hot and cold dynamic does not feel like a red flag. It feels familiar. It feels like love. This is the first mechanism. Your attachment style does not attract random people into your life. It creates a filter. You are unconsciously scanning for partners who match the emotional pattern you learned as a child, and dismissing people who do not fit that pattern, even if those people would actually be good for you. The practical step here is to identify your attachment style. Take a validated assessment. Read the research. Because the moment you can name the pattern, you stop being controlled by it. In 1920, Sigmund Freud described something he found deeply puzzling. He observed that patients kept recreating painful experiences from their past, not because they enjoyed suffering, but because some part of their psyche was trying to fix the original wound by reliving it. He called this repetition compulsion. Modern psychology has refined Freud's concept significantly. A 2014 study published in Psychoanalytic Psychology found that adults who experienced emotional neglect, unpredictable caregiving, or abuse in childhood are significantly more likely to enter relationships that reproduce those same dynamics. The researchers emphasized that this is not a conscious choice. The individual genuinely believes they are choosing differently. But the unconscious mind is steering them toward the same emotional environment over and over. Here is how it works in practice. Suppose you grew up with a parent who was emotionally unavailable, present physically but absent emotionally. You spent your childhood trying to earn their attention, their approval, their love. You never fully got it. That unfinished business gets carried forward into adulthood, and now, without realizing it, you are attracted to partners who are emotionally unavailable, because your psyche recognizes an opportunity to finally win the love it could not get the first time. The cruel irony is that the unconscious goal of repetition compulsion is healing. Your mind genuinely believes that if you can just get this emotionally unavailable person to love you, the original wound will close. But it never works that way. Because you are not choosing a partner, you are choosing a reenactment. The practical shift requires brutal honesty. When you feel an intense magnetic pull toward someone, especially early on, that is not a sign of compatibility. That is your nervous system recognizing a familiar pattern. Real compatibility rarely announces itself with fireworks. It tends to feel quieter, steadier, and, if you are used to chaos, almost boring. There is a specific kind of attachment that forms not despite mistreatment, but because of it. It is called a trauma bond, and it is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in human relationships. The concept was first formally described by Patrick Carnes in the early 1990s, but the underlying mechanism was identified decades earlier through research on intermittent reinforcement, a behavioral principle first demonstrated by B.F. Skinner. Skinner found that when a reward is given inconsistently and unpredictably, The subject becomes more attached to the source of that reward than when the reward is given consistently. The unpredictability creates a compulsive need to keep trying. A 2018 study published in the journal Psychological Trauma found that trauma bonds share neurochemical signatures with substance addiction. The cycle of abuse, tension, explosion, reconciliation, calm, triggers alternating floods of cortisol and dopamine. The stress of the bad moments makes the relief of the good moments feel euphoric. Over time, the brain becomes chemically dependent on this cycle. This is why people in trauma-bonded relationships say things like "no one has ever made me feel as alive as they do," or "the good times are so good that they make the bad times worth it." They are not delusional. They are describing a neurochemical reality. The highs feel higher because they are preceded by devastating lows, and the brain, wired to seek reward, keeps chasing the next high. If you keep finding yourself in relationships where the intensity feels like depth, where the drama feels like passion, where the reconciliation after a fight feels like the most connected you have ever been, you may not be attracting the wrong people. You may be addicted to them. The practical step is to learn the difference between intensity and intimacy. Intensity is a roller coaster, thrilling but unstable. Intimacy is a foundation, quiet but enduring. Trauma bonds feel like the most profound connection of your life. Healthy bonds feel like safety. If safety bores you, that is not a preference. That is a wound talking. The final mechanism is the simplest, and in some ways the most difficult to overcome. Your brain is wired to prefer what it already knows. This is called the mere exposure effect, first documented by psychologist Robert Zajonc in 1968. Zajonc found that simply being exposed to something repeatedly makes you like it more, regardless of whether it is good for you. In relationships, this means that emotional environments you grew up in feel like home, even when home was a dangerous place. A 2012 study from the University of Texas found that individuals from high-conflict households rated high-conflict romantic partners as more attractive and more trustworthy than low-conflict partners. Not because they consciously wanted conflict, because conflict was what they knew. And the brain equates what it knows with what is safe. This is the reason that genuinely kind, stable, emotionally available partners often feel wrong to people who grew up in unstable environments. The stability does not register as safety. It registers as unfamiliar. And the brain interprets unfamiliar as threatening. Bowlby himself wrote about this in the later years of his career. He observed that patients would consistently describe healthy partners as boring or lacking chemistry, while describing partners who replicated their childhood dynamics as exciting and deeply connected. The internal working model, the blueprint formed in infancy, was overriding rational judgment. The practical implication is uncomfortable but essential. If every partner you have been drawn to has turned out to be wrong for you, then your sense of attraction is not a reliable guide. You have to be willing to sit with the discomfort of choosing someone who does not match your pattern. The person who feels right might be the most dangerous choice you can make, and the person who feels unfamiliar might be exactly what you need. These four mechanisms, attachment style, repetition compulsion, trauma bonding, and familiarity bias, do not operate in isolation. They reinforce each other. Your attachment style determines who you are drawn to. Repetition compulsion keeps you reenacting the same dynamic. Trauma bonding hooks you neurochemically once you are inside it. And familiarity bias makes the whole pattern feel like love. This is not a cycle you can think your way out of. Knowing about these mechanisms is necessary, but it is not sufficient. Breaking the pattern requires doing something your entire nervous system will resist. Choosing differently, choosing the person who does not trigger the old wound. Sitting with the discomfort of stability. Learning to recognize that the absence of chaos is not the absence of connection. The wrong people are not finding you by accident. Your own psychology is sending out a signal, shaped by your earliest experiences, broadcasting exactly what you are willing to tolerate. Change the signal, and you change who shows up. But first, you